Okay, hopefully this shows up for you. Obviously, I'm not here in class. I wanted to go over the skills check with you to make sure you understand what's going on before you go into this test. So, kind of follow along with me here. When you're looking at these trinomials, when you're trying to factor a quadratic polynomial, remember you're working with something that's in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, so when you look at this, you're asking yourself, what's a times c? Well, in this case, that's going to be 1 times 24, or just 24. Okay, so now you're going, what factors of 24 add up to being 14? Well, in this case, it's going to be 2 and 12. So 2 times 12 gives me 24. These also add up to being 14 here. So we want to rewrite our original equation, polynomial. Instead of using 14, we're going to say 12x plus 2x plus 24. Okay, now you go through and you do your factoring by grouping. What's the greatest common factor here? Well, in this case, it's just x. So you're left with x plus 12 in parentheses. What's your greatest common factor here? Well, that's going to be 2. And again, we have x plus 12 in parentheses. Remember, we want what's in parentheses to be exactly the same so we can factor those out. So you've got x plus 12 times x plus 2. That's going to be your answer for this problem. Okay? Moving on to this next one. Same idea, a times c. Well, in this case, you get negative 21 because it's 1 times negative 21. Now, what factors of negative 21 have a difference of 4? Now, I say difference because this is negative. Our signs need to be both positive and negative. So in this case, we know 7 times 3 is 21. Well, positive 7 times negative 3 gives me negative 21, and when I add these together, I get positive 4. So again, rewrite your original polynomial, so plus 7n minus 3n minus 21, group. Now notice how when I group this one, I group that negative sign within that parentheses. And I'm going to say, okay, this is n times n plus 7 minus 3, because that's going to be my greatest common factor here. And the reason I'm pulling out a minus 3 is because I want to get n plus 7 in parentheses there. So now when I factor one step further, it's n minus 3 times n plus 7. That's my factored polynomial for number 2. Okay, that may be overkill. You do have some shortcuts you can use there, but I want to make sure you see this process multiple times. Now, when I've got a leading coefficient that's different than 1, you have to go through this a times c process. It's going to be the most efficient, most concise way of doing this. First thing you want to ask yourself, though, is do I have any common factors here? Is there a greatest common factor between each of these 3 terms? In this case, the answer is no. And I want my leading coefficient to be positive. In this case, it is. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to do my a times c just like I've been doing. So in this case, you get negative 18. Now, what factors of negative 18 subtract to give me negative 3? Well, negative 6 times positive 3 is negative 18. And when I add those together, I get negative 3. So again, rewrite your original polynomial. All I'm doing is rewriting the middle term. Some of you are going to want to put 18 here, negative 18, but remember it stays exactly the same as what it was originally. So now go through and do your grouping. 2x is the greatest common factor here, and what I'm left over with is x minus 3. Greatest common factor here is 3. You're left with x minus 3. Now, when I pull out my greatest common factor of these 2 terms, x minus 3 is a factor of both. This is factored as far as I can go. Remember, we can always multiply these back together to check to see if it ends up giving us that. In this case, it will. Also, double check to make sure that we have factored completely. Can I factor either of these any further? The answer is no, so I'm done. So now here, is my leading coefficient positive? Yes. Do I have a greatest common factor? No. So at this point, I go into my a times c. So I've got this now is 40. Now because this is positive and this is negative, both of my factors need to be negative. So what 2 negative numbers multiply together to give me 40 and add together to give me negative 13? Well, that's negative 8 and negative 5. So rewrite. Notice how the process doesn't necessarily change, just the numbers. Go through and do your grouping. Notice again, I'm grouping that negative sign with my negative 5x. Greatest common factor of my first parentheses is 4x. I'm going to be left with x minus 2. So this is what I should be looking for in this parentheses here after I pull out the greatest common factor. So that's why I'm doing negative 5, because I want x minus 2. Notice how these parentheses are the same. 4x minus 5, x minus 2. These are the correct answers for your quiz. Hopefully going over them and seeing that a second time is helpful, and hopefully this is good review also for some of these problems that are going to be upcoming here on your next test.